Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writing a New Jersey Contract of Sale. All right. The sales contract has 13 pages, commencing with a notice to the buyer and seller. Basically, this notice explains that the client would be advised to hire an attorney. In the state of New Jersey, that is common that attorneys represent clients in real estate transactions. Not true in all states. There's not much to fill out on this notice. Basically, you're going to have your client read it. On line 1 here, you are going to, in 99% of the cases, you're going to initial the buyer, not the seller. And that's who you're representing. It may also be both the seller and the buyer, depending on your agency relationship. At the bottom here, you're going to have the buyer sign. It is not mandatory that the seller has to fill this out too. Sometimes they will. That's fine. Make sure you put the selling broker here under the buyer, and that will be Keller Williams Cornerstone, and your name under the name of the real estate licensee. All right, moving on to page 2. I'm going to refer to on the left side of this document, I'm going to refer to the numbers so it's easier to move around and to be more accurate as to where I'm pointing you. There's also, I'll call them paragraphs or sections. Here's section 1, here's section 2, but I'm going to pretty much go with these numbers on the left side of the document. So on line 18, 19, 20, we're going to have the buyer's names. It has room for up to 4 buyers. That's pretty simple. The buyer's address will go on 22 and 24. Agrees to purchase from. Now this will be your seller. Now you may not always know the seller's name. You may not. I always recommend you pull the tax records for the property that you're attempting to purchase. And that should give you the seller's name to indicate here. It's okay if you leave it blank if you cannot locate it. The attorney can fill it in later. Same with the seller's address. If you have it, great. If you don't, it's not the end of the world. Okay, line 36 is the property address. Line 38, municipal tax map of, town name or township would go in there. County, self-explanatory. Line 40, block and lot number. You can get these from both the tax record and from the multiple listing document. Okay, moving on to line 44, total purchase price. This will be the offer. So whatever the offer is will go on line 44. Line 45, initial deposit. We don't really do that anymore. It's not necessary to have an initial deposit, meaning immediately with the offer. So I would leave that as NA or 0. Line 46, additional deposit. Now this would be the deposit you're going to put down, I recommend, after conclusion of attorney review. You want to wait till attorney review is over so that you make sure that the contract's been approved by both attorneys before you enter into any expenses and put any kind of deposits down. So generally, I recommend a 2-week period from the date of the contract, and the amount of that deposit is up to your client. Now they can, let's say they're putting 20% total down as a deposit. It's their choice how they want to do that. They can put 10% down on line 46 right after attorney review, and then they can bring the other 10% to closing. Obviously, the more you put down earlier, the better for the seller. The seller will like that. It means you have some skin in the game, and it shows you're a serious buyer. So that's really, as long as your client understands that, it's up to your client as to how he splits that up, whether he puts it all down initially or some down now and then some down at closing. So that's your additional deposit on line 46. Line 47, Of course, that'll be whatever the mortgage amount is. Line 48 will be any additional deposits you are bringing to closing. Now, it could be non-applicable or zero, depending on how your client wants to handle this, as I mentioned earlier. So that's what would go on line 48. Moving on to page 3. Okay, here on page 3 we have on line 56 additional deposit. As I said earlier, the initial deposit is really not necessary. So whatever your additional deposit is, you're going to indicate the time frame. So on line 57, I usually recommend 2 weeks. Again, we want to wait until it's out of attorney review. Now usually attorney review is 3-4 days tops, so it shouldn't be an issue if you put 2 weeks. If attorney review for some reason is delayed, your attorney can always extend that date. So as a general guideline, put 2 weeks. Line 61, any deposit monies are typically held in a non-interest bearing trust account of buyer's attorney. So indicate buyer's attorney there. If we have a mortgage, we're going to skip down to line 75. The principal mortgage amount will go in this first area, type of mortgage. It's really not necessary to put the terms and the monthly payment and if you want to do that, fine, but all they need to really know is the principal amount and the type of the mortgage. Line 79 will be the mortgage commitment date. This is the date where, by this date, we expect to have a written commitment from the lender that says, although there may be a few conditions, the loan has been approved. Typically, you want to do this at least a couple of weeks before closing. And from the date of the contract, most lenders should be able to do this within 30 days. But have your client, your buyer, check with their lender and make sure what date is comfortable for you to put in this field. Okay. All right. Moving down to line 94. This is if you're bringing any, this is the closing, actually, the closing date. So you're going to just enter the closing date here. If there are monies due at closing, obviously you'll bring that, your client will bring that to closing, but this is the closing date that you are recommending. It's up to you, it's up to your client what closing date they choose. That can also, that can always be negotiated between the buyer and the seller, as anything in the contract can be. Okay, page 4. We have items included and excluded from sale. So line 114 is what's included with the sale. Now, generally on the listing, you will see the appliances that are included, like it may say washer, dryer, etc. I recommend you specifically write them down on line 114. Some agents will put down as per listing number XXX, but I would recommend you actually put the items in there just to make sure everything is documented. Items excluded from sale, usually that'll be blank, but they may exclude something that you would normally expect them to expect that would come with the house. Say a ceiling fan. You would think, the seller would leave the ceiling fans. If they tell you, I'm taking the ceiling fan in the living room, just make sure you indicate that on line 120. Okay, this next section, most of these these next sections will be left to the attorney. You'll notice, for example, on line 137, there is a field, and this is a field for any expenses related to a CO. Now, you could put a number there. I prefer to let the attorney handle this, and also there is, you'll see after the field, it'll say, if left blank, then 1.5 of purchase price. So the attorney will look this over. If he wants to put a dollar amount in line 137, he will. He or she will. But that's what I recommend here. Municipal assessments, if you're aware of any, you can certainly indicate has been notified. Usually that'll be has not. So you can fill that in. Line 174, again, I would leave that to the attorney. Usually, if it's a single family, you can certainly put the word single in there. Line 188 and 197, usually you won't have tenants involved. If it's a house that your buyer's going to purchase that currently has tenants in it, that's the information that would go in here. Pretty self-explanatory. If the home was built prior to 1978, you have to indicate that the lead paint hazard is applicable. And you would also have a lead paint addendum attached to the contract. Moving on to page 6. Line 233 and 235, leave them to the attorney is my advice. Point of entry treatment. Now these are septic systems. If you do have a septic system, you're going to indicate that here. Usually you will say it's not applicable because a POET system is a unique type of septic. Not many homes have cesspools anymore, so you're most likely going to indicate not applicable. If the home does have a cesspool, then you have all kinds of issues you have to deal with, including separate addendums to the contract. So definitely this is an area where the attorney would have to fill this whole section out, and we'd have to have any related addendums attached to the contract of sale. Moving along to page 7, we have our, most of this is just issues you can leave to the attorney, as I said before. Same with page 8. Page 9 has a list of airports, or not airports, but communities that have airports. It's up to your client, your buyer, to read these over and make he or she aware that there could be an airport in the town that they're considering purchasing their property in. Page 9, page 10, really nothing to worry about. Page 11, here you're going to indicate the real estate firms that are involved in it. On line 538, it'll be Keller Williams Cornerstone usually, and your name on line 539. On 543, you're going to indicate how you're representing that, and usually it'll be buyer's agent or possibly disclosed dual agent. On line 546, this is the listing office, so information supplied by, that'll be the name of the listing office. And they will, of course, be the seller's agent. Broker information and commission. The listing firm will be first. It is not required to have a real estate commission license ID. You can leave that blank. You're going to have the listing firm's address here, telephone number if you have it, and everything you have. Now, the commission due listing firm you will not know, so that's why it says per listing agreement. You can leave that the way it is. Participating firm will be Keller Williams, and that's our office information. So you can now commission due participating firm here on line 580. Whatever's on the listing you can put there. So for example, 2.5 minus 50, just put that there. Okay, moving on to page 12. On line 591, you need to disclose if the buyer is a real estate agent. Moving down to 13, this is the final page. If there are any contract addendums that are applicable, you want to check them off here. Any contractual provisions, usually this will be blank, but if, for example, you had a contingency like that the buyer has to sell his house before he purchases this, you definitely want to have that in there. Any kinds of contingencies basically is in line 668. And then of course you're going to have your buyer sign and date this page. You can witness it. It's not mandatory, but that's certainly something you can do. And don't forget, the buyer has to initial every page of this document. So that's it. I hope it's helpful to you. That's a contract of sale. Have a great day. Take care.